Hey, Chris, in your estimation, what is the biggest reason for the Celtics' inconsistency this year?
I mean, if you're looking at box scores across that stretch and really across the entire season,
Right.
it comes down to 3-point shooting, and their depth seems to be pretty reliant on 3-point shooting. And that's not to say that's a bad thing because that's just kind of where the game is right now. Like that's a lot of depth, a lot of cores across the league are relying on 3-point shooting. But for the Celtics, it seems to be a little more drastic. So you look at Toronto on Thursday, the game against Toronto, excuse me, they shot 51%. They made 23s, right?
Yeah.
And last night it was not quite as nice. It
Yeah.
was
No.
ugly. And then it makes the depth look terrible. So it's a lot of reliant on 3-point shooting, and it's a lot of inconsistent ball movement. So again, going back to the Raptors game, that's the far, far positive end of the spectrum, but the ball is whipping around. They finish with, let me look here, 30 assists. Last night, Friday night, they had 15 assists. So that's double the assists. So you can tell that ball is moving away from Jaylen Brown. It's moving away from Jason Tatum. And that's when you get guys open. You get an NBA guy open. It doesn't matter if he's a starter or he's a bench player. There's a damn good chance he's gonna hit a shot if he's wide open. So it's a lack of that crisp ball movement, and they kind of just go stagnant. And it's hard because a lot of the possessions you're working with this bench unit,
Mhm.
it's Tatum in the bench. And Tatum's style is to beat guys off the dribble. And when there's not a lot of ball movement, at least leading up to that, then it just immediately goes to some ISO work. And it's just kind of like Jason off to the side, working off the dribble, and then four guys kind of looking at him with the occasional screener coming up. And so that is inherently bad just because it turns into stagnant possessions. And so that's why the trade discussion keeps coming up, just because you need to grab that other wing threat, because when it's Tatum in the bench, which is the unit they always go with, and it's not necessarily a bad unit, but
Right.
when they go with that unit, it can become pretty stagnant just because there's not a whole lot of movement away from the ball. And on the ball, there hasn't been too much movement either of late.
Yeah, and I agree with you in that sense. When you have Tatum and the rest of the guys,
Yeah.
Tatum's this otherworldly player, and we'll get into Tatum in just a little bit. Trust me, we got a lot to talk about in that particular department. But you have a lot of guys with similar skill sets, and those skill sets are very, very small, right? Like if you want to have, and we'll get into more of these things, but like let's say you have the lineup of Tatum and Kemba and Brown, and we'll throw Shemi out there because he's been the starter lately, and Daniel Tice. Well, you got three guys that can handle the ball pretty well and move the ball around in Kemba, Tatum, and Brown. And then you have one stationary shooter, really, in Shemi Ojale. And then you have Daniel Tice, who does a lot of the dirty work, but he can spread the court out, right?
Mhm.
That is a unit that can really thrive because you have so many ball handlers, guys that can move the basketball. But when you have, Jason Tatum, Carson Edwards, we'll throw Shemi back in there, Grant Williams, and Tristan Thompson. It's just a lot of guys that have one particular skill set. I mean, I'm not trying to say they only have one. Grant does a good job moving the ball around, but he's not a guy that's going to create offense for himself. I love
Mhm.
the way Carson Edwards has been playing lately, and as a guy that has I'm done with the Jeff Teague stuff. Like I'm just absolutely, I've had it. I'm done. Like to see Carson Edwards out there, I get a little happy about it. But again, he's very, very limited skill set
Mhm.
right now. Still working out a few things, trying to get comfortable on the NBA floor, right? So, you know, to your point, it's Brad Stevens not giving Tatum enough to work with, but yet they don't have a lot to work with. Because I go back to the inconsistency stuff. This injury thing is getting outrageous. I mean, last night, no Robert Williams. Marcus Smart, we know, is going to be out for a bit. Jaylen Brown apparently has knee tendonitis that needs to be monitored the rest of the year. We already
Mhm.
know Kemba's having knee, not having knee issues, but his knees are being, carefully monitored throughout the season. Pritchard's coming back from it. Like, it's hard to get a real grapple of this team because they just have so many injuries at key spots, right? They don't have too many backup bigs they can kind of go to, right? They're very now limited in that capacity. You take out Marcus Smart and Kemba Walker in a game, well, now your point guard rotation is all out of whack. Jeff Teague now has to play along with Carson. Like you see what I'm getting at. So
Mhm.
the injury bug it's not just injuries. I'm not going to try to put it all in injuries, but this injury bug prevents this team from getting any sort of rhythm. And this doesn't even mention the fact we haven't even seen Romeo Langford yet. So it's
Yeah.
just, at the end of the day, you want to be able to, you watch Toronto and you're like, oh my goodness, this team, this is amazing. And then you get to the Detroit game, and it just humbles you a little bit and reminds you that, like, okay, this team is so much far away from a finished product, and the one thing they really need to work on is being holding each other accountable and being ready to step up when they know this injury thing is a serious problem.
Yeah, I mean, your point about the depth having, relatively one-dimensional skill sets is definitely well taken, because there's certainly something to that. You look at what Brad Stevens is working with right now, and again, like you said, the injuries make this a hell of a lot more difficult than it really was expected to be. Coming into the season, we knew that they were going to have a lack of wing depth, and we knew that the bench could potentially be a problem. But the injuries to Marcus Smart, the injuries to Semi Ojeleye last night, like, they pile up, and obviously Romeo Langford, like, they pile up, and there's a trickle down effect. It makes things difficult, right? Because you already don't have a lot of wings, and say Shemi does have to miss a game, say he doesn't play tomorrow against Washington or something like that. Like, he's been playing very well. You're down another wing, and then it forces more minutes for probably Jeff Teague or another, scorer off the bench. And that's a problem, because you're bringing in these guards like Pritchard and Teague. Now, Pritchard has been tremendous. He's been great. Yeah. He's probably been the best player off the bench.
No question.
But that makes your defensive versatility so brutal. Like, there's really no way around it. Like, when you're forced to play Teague and Pritchard a lot, your defensive versatility is tough. And it's clear that Aaron Nesmith can't be out there defensively, because he's still trying to figure it out. And that's fine, because he is such a shortened training camp, like barely any preseason. No, he played a year and a half in college. Like, it's not crazy to say, like, he's around where he should be. Like, it's not really, to expect him to be a plug and play guy was a little bit unfair. But the one-dimensional style of this bench is, again, I keep coming back to it, but that's why the Celtics need to be active with this TPE, because it's so limiting no matter what direction you go. And Grant Williams has been really good, and that's been a nice perk. And Semi Ojeleye has been really good, and that's been a nice perk. And so is Peyton Pritchard. But outside of them, there's a whole lot of nothing, and it falls off really hard. And yeah, Carson had a nice stretch, but, like, you can't rely on him defensively. You saw against Phoenix, yeah, Brad rewards him with a start because he played well against the Clippers. He's just going to get bullied against guys like Devin Booker and stuff. So
yeah, Chris Paul versus Carson Edwards is
right. It's just not. Yeah, like Devin Booker saw the matchup with Carson Edwards and went right at him immediately. Right. So that's just a tough matchup from the start, and it's hard because Carson is still trying to develop into his own pro style, where he was coming out of college as this volume shooter. He's not going to be a volume shooter in a lineup with Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown and that's just not the way this works. So there's a lot of adjustments that need to be made for a guy like him, but you can't make them overnight. So it's hard to blame them, but I don't know, man. I mean, there's a lot of one-dimensional skill sets on that bench, and I think more important than the scoring is the defensive versatility that it ultimately lacks, and that's a real problem.
Was it rough for you watching Saddiq Bey go off last night?
No, it wasn't rough at all, man. I was having the time of my life. I tweeted that back to Corrales. I mean, I love watching Saddiq Bey play, and I led that train for so long. To have him, he played very well in the first game of the back-to-back earlier in the season against the Celtics. So to have him go for 30 last night was just life-affirming. It was tremendous. I know Celtics fans didn't like it, but man, I enjoyed it. I'm a fan of all things Saddiq Bey.
I caped for I didn't do it as hard as you did, but he got on my radar. I mean, first off, I have a fiction for Nova guys only because I long for the days of the older Big East when rivalries really meant something. In college basketball today, it's a little different. Mm-hmm. But I always have a soft spot for like the UConn guys, the Villanova guys. Anybody who wants to bring St. John's back to the promised land, I'm totally down for.
Right.
Seton Hall. I mean, I'm down for all that stuff. And to watch and I'm a big Jay Wright fan. So I'm pretty much anybody that comes out of Nova lately is just like a really smart player. Just seems like a guy you should draft. I don't know how, the Jalen Brunsons of the world. And you're going to go back to all these guys. They all just seem to know how to play.
100%.
And you look at Saddiq Bey and you're like, damn, like that, having him. And I'm not trying to pile on Nesmith, right? As you said, a year and a half of basketball. His shot is good. He needs to find rhythm. He needs to get practice because the defensive end, he has no clue. And like you look at the end of the game against Toronto on Thursday night, and they go zone at the end of the game. He still has no clue where to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sitting there like, man, this is so tough because he needs to play, but he can't play because he just makes too many defensive mistakes. And if you're going to make that many defensive mistakes and you're not going to shoot well, you're not going to see the floor.